Hi guys, welcome back. We're going to do chapter 23 part 2 and talk about natural selection, genetic drift, and gene flow. Alright, we're going to look at how they can alter frequencies in a population. So there are three major factors that alter allele frequencies and bring about most evolutionary change. Those factors are natural selection, which is non-random. There's genetic drift and genetic flow, which are random occurrences. Okay, natural selection is differential success in reproduction results in certain alleles being passed on to the next generation in greater proportions by the more fit individuals. Genetic drift describes how allele frequencies fluctuate randomly from one generation to the next. The smaller a sample, the greater the chance of deviation from a predicted result. Genetic drift tends to reduce genetic variation through losses of alleles. Alright, in this figure, which you will find on page 476, it is giving you an example of genetic drift. The small wildflower population has a stable size of 10 plants. Suppose that by chance only 5 plants, those in the white boxes, of generation 1 produce fertile offspring. This could occur, for example, if only those plants happen to grow in a location that provided enough nutrients to support the population of offspring. Again, by chance, only 2 plants of generation 2 leave fertile offspring. As a result, by chance alone, the frequency of the CW allele first increases in generation 2, then falls to 0 in generation 3. Okay? So that's just showing how it is by chance, depending on nutrients available, which individuals survive to reproductive age. Okay. Genetic drift. There's a thing called the founder effect, which occurs when a few individuals become isolated from a larger population. Your allele frequencies in the smaller founder population can be different from those in the larger population. Alright, then there's also a bottleneck effect. It's a sudden reduction in population size due to a change in the environment, such as natural disaster. The resulting gene pool may no longer be reflective of the original population's gene pool. If the population remains small, it may be further affected by genetic drift. Okay, here's showing an example of that bottleneck effect. You can see this on 477. We're using a bottle and some marbles to exemplify this. So, shaking just a few marbles through the narrow neck of a bottle is analogous to drastic reduction in the size of a population. By chance, the blue marbles are overrepresented in the surviving population, and the gold marbles are absent. So, by chance, whatever allele frequency is represented by the blue marbles is the one that happens to be most overrepresented, and however, also by chance, the gold allele is non-represented at all. So it is all just by chance as to what survives that whatever bottlenecks that population. Okay? Effects of genetic drift. So here's a summary. Genetic drift is significant in small populations. It causes allele frequencies to change at random. It can lead to a loss of genetic variation within populations and can cause harmful alleles to become fixed. Okay, gene flow, you have immigration and immigration, or immigration and emigration, if it helps you to remember it that way. Gene flow consists of the movement of alleles among populations. Alleles can be transferred through the movement of fertile individuals or gametes, for example, pollen. Gene flow tends to reduce differences between populations over time. Gene flow is more likely than mutation to alter allele frequencies directly. Okay, so and remember, immigration with an I or immigration is something moving into an area, where emigration is something exiting or moving out of an area. Okay, this example or this picture is on page 478, and it is showing gene flow in human evolution. The migration of people throughout the world has increased gene flow between populations that once were isolated from one another. This computer-generated image on the magazine cover illustrates how gene flow can homogenize the gene pools of such populations, thereby reducing geographic variation in appearance. Okay? She's a mix of several different races together. So they are predicting in time that there will be a new face of America where we don't have specific traits based on where our heritage is from. We have a new blend of traits unique to the vast amount of variation that we find in our population now. Okay? So going into 23.4, natural selection is the only mechanism that consistently causes adaptive evolution. Only natural selection consistently results in adaptive evolution is because it brings about the evolution by acting on an organism's phenotype. So natural selection phrases struggle for existence and survival of the fittest are misleading as they imply direct competition among individuals. Reproductive success is generally more subtle and depends on many factors. Relative fitness is the contribution an individual makes to the gene pool of its next generation, so relative to the contributions of other individuals. Selection favors certain genotypes by acting on the phenotypes of certain organisms. Okay? There are three modes of natural selection. There's directional selection, where it favors individuals at one end of the phenotypic range. There's disruptive selection that favors individuals at both extremes of the phenotypic range. And there's stabilizing selection that favors intermediate variants and acts against extreme phenotypes. Okay, this figure on page 480 is showing these modes of selection. These cases describe three ways in which a hypothetical deer mouse population with heritable variation in fur color from light to dark might evolve. The graphs show how frequencies of individuals with different fur colors change over time. The large white arrow symbolizes selective pressures against certain phenotypes. So what it's showing here in directional selection, this is the heavy red line is your original population. The dotted is the evolved population. Alright, it's showing that this directional selection shifts the overall makeup of the population by favoring variants at one extreme of the distribution. In this case, darker mice are favored because they live among dark rocks and darker fur color conceals them from predators. Disruptive selection favors variants at both ends of the distribution. These mice have colonized a patchy habitat made up of light and dark rocks, the result being that mice of an intermediate color are at a disadvantage. Those that are dark can blend in with darker rocks better, and those in the light that are light colored can blend with lighter rocks better. Alright, and then stabilizing selection would be where it's removing your extreme variants from the population and preserves your intermediate type. If the environment consists of rocks of an intermediate color, both light and dark mice will be selected against. Okay? The key role of natural selection in adaptive evolution. Natural selection increases the frequencies of alleles that enhance survival and reproduction. Adaptive evolution is the match between an organism and its environment. Okay, this figure here on page 481 is showing the natural selection adaptive evolution. Some examples. So the color changing ability in cuttlefish. In a split second, the cuttlefish can blend against its background, enabling it to hide from predators and surprise its prey. Alright, the movable jawbones in snakes. The skull bones of most terrestrial vertebrates are relatively rigidly attached to one another, limiting jaw movement. In contrast, however, snakes have movable bones in their upper jaw, allowing them to swallow food much larger than their head. And then another example, or another reason for this being, it gives them a wider range of resources to eat. Okay. Because environments change, adaptive evolution is a continuous process. Genetic drift and gene flow are random, and so they do not consistently lead to adaptive evolution, as they can increase or decrease the match between an organism and its environment. Because they happen at random, they don't have a set goal. Whereas adaptive evolution, natural selection, is selecting for things that make the next generation more likely to survive. So, it is the most likely to help an organism fit its environment. Okay, sexual selection is a natural selection for mating success. It can result in sexual dimorphism or marked differences between the sexes in secondary sexual characteristics. So male showiness due to mate choice can increase a male's chances of attracting a female while decreasing his chances of survival. For example, in a peacock, the male is much more brightly colored, much more attractive than the very drab female. However, he's also like a flashing buffet sign to a predator. Hey, come get me, I'm here, where the female has a better chance of being able to blend in her surroundings and thus evade being lunch for a little while longer. Alright, so how do female preferences evolve? So the good gene hypothesis suggests that if a trait is related to male health, both the male trait and female preference for that trait should be selected for. So preservation of genetic variation. Various mechanisms help preserve genetic variation in a population. Diploidy maintains genetic variation in the form of hidden recessive alleles. Heterozygote advantage occurs when heterozygotes have a higher fitness than do both homozygotes. Natural selection will tend to maintain two or more alleles at that locus. Alright, the sickle cell allele causes mutations in hemoglobin, but it also confers a malaria resistance. Okay? Here, this figure on page 483 is showing that heterozygote advantage. So this is mapping malaria and the sickle cell allele. Sickle cell allele is most common in Africa, but is not the only case of heterozygote advantage providing protection against malaria. Alleles at other loci are found by heterozygote advantage in populations near the Mediterranean Sea and in Southeast Asia, where malaria is also widespread. So, what this is showing is the checkered background is showing the distribution of malaria caused by a parasitic unicellular eukaryote, and this shaded from white to dark pink is the frequency of that sickle cell allele. The places that are more prone to malaria have areas that have a very high frequency of that sickle cell allele that conveys malaria resistance. Okay? Frequency-dependent selection. In frequency-dependent selection, the fitness of a phenotype declines if it becomes too common in the population. Selection favors whichever phenotype is less common in a population. Okay, frequency-dependent selection here is shown on page 484, I'm sorry. Alright, and what this is showing is that frequency-dependent selection in scale-eating fish. Alright, and scientists at Kyoto University, Japan, noted the frequency of left-mouthed individuals rises and falls in a regular manner at each of the 3 time periods when the phenotypes of breeding adults were assessed. Adults that reproduced had the opposite phenotype of that which was most common in the population. Thus it appeared that right-mouthed individuals were favored by selection when left-mouthed individuals were more common, and vice versa. Okay? Neutral variation is genetic variation that appears to confer no selective advantage or disadvantage. So, for example, variation in non-coding regions of DNA and variation in proteins that have little effect on protein function or reproductive fitness. Alright, why natural selection cannot fashion perfect organisms? Selection can only act on existing variations. Evolution is limited by historical constraints. Adaptations are often compromises, and chance, natural selection, and the environment all interact. So you don't just have one factor playing a role in how traits are preserved and passed on. You have chance and environment also playing a role. Okay, these are the things that you need to be able to know and discuss for your upcoming checkpoint questions and possible quiz. Alright, you need to be able to explain why majority of point mutations are harmless, sexual recombination gametes and genetic variability generates genetic variability, know your terms, be able to list the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium conditions, apply the equation, explain natural selection and how it is the only one that consistently produces adaptive change, and explain the role of population size and genetic drift. Also be able to know the difference in the different types of selection and why natural selection cannot perfect a population. Alright, that wraps that up. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Make me a list for our discussion. Make sure to answer your checkpoint questions. Thanks, guys. Bye.